Welcome to Natural Habitat Adventures Daily Dose of Nature. A river runs through it, touching landscapes, lives, and wildlife. Presented by Nat Hab expedition leaders Conan Dumenil and Arpita Dutta. I'm your host, Rob Mess. Thank you all so much for joining us today. Over to you, Conan.
Thank you, Rob. And once again, it is such a pleasure to be back here. Just as we were waiting for you folks to log in, we were talking about rivers and the whole interconnectedness of it all. And honestly speaking, I couldn't think of a better title, so I had to lift this one from the movie. But yeah, that's what our webinar is at today. We will follow a journey, a virtual journey, albeit, and talk about some of these river systems and how they influence things around them. So with me is Arpita, friend and fellow expedition leader. And we will... Oh, sorry, I just have to get used to that lag. Sorry, Arpita, I didn't mean to cut you off. And yeah, we're coming to you on a fairly crisp winter evening from India. The weather's starting to change. And like any great conversation, it always involves a lot of chai. So thank you once again for joining us, and let's get to it. Right. So why rivers, right? And why do we? What is the significance of this presentation? Why do we need to talk about it? So when we were discussing topics and pulling out ideas of what we should talk about that will still keep our viewers engaged, we started off with one river and said, it's so important. Let's talk about the river system on the whole, or give a slightly more bird's eye view of the whole thing. So rivers and, by that extension, the freshwater systems form the very essence of human life on this earth as we see it. And through history, we've seen civilizations thrive on their banks. We've seen animals depend on them for their daily needs. And we've seen rivers as they shape landscapes and leave such an indelible mark on everything they touch. And at the same time, rivers are also fragile. And so this session, this webinar today, what we want to do is showcase this region, the subcontinent or a large part of Asia, when we talk about the region, showcase some of the characteristic rivers. And through our discussions and from guiding in this region for a few years, Arpita and I have lived and worked and now continue to guide in this region. And through our experiences through these years, we want to show you what we've learned and some of our observations from here. Now, to mention about work and guide, Arpita, you, I think, compared to the two of us, have had a fairly hands-on association with these rivers. So to start off with, why don't you tell us with some of the work and lay a little perspective and how it fits into the larger scheme of things?
Yes, thank you, Conan, and thank you, Rob, for being there, for being such a lovely host. And thank you all the viewers who are attending this webinar today. Yes, Conan, I think I have spent a part of my life in this habitat, in this river system, which is Brahmaputra. It's one of the largest river in India. And also, this is the only river in India which is referred as he, because it's called the mighty Brahmaputra for different reason, which we are going to talk about slowly. And yes, recently I have worked there for last 2 years on freshwater turtle conservation with Turtle Survival Alliance, and specifically working on those species which are critically endangered, and we are trying to bring back the population in the wild. So that's how did a lot of river surveys and being into those places where generally you can't be there. So that was the best part of the thing. But honestly, in last so many years, maybe more than a decade, I have seen this river system has changed the habitat and of course the diversity of the animals as well with the course of time. But Conan, before getting into Brahmaputra, it's better we start from the beginning, which is the Hindu Kush Himalayan mountain range and the Tibetan Plateau, And worldwide, it is also known as the third pole, because it has the huge ice sheet there. And one more is, it's like a freshwater reservoir after the Arctic regions, I mean the Arctic and the Antarctic region. So if we talk about this area, that if you go to the next slide, there are, yes, so if we talk about Hindu Kush mountain, which is starting from the western side and it extends on the eastern region, is the Karakoram range, and the more southeast we have the Himalayan range. And this whole sheet has, it's huge, and this is one of the youngest mountain. So yeah, young like you, of course, Conan. Always very charming and still growing. So yes, there are a lot of like tectonic movements happen due to that. I think same happened with your life as well. And so that's a very seismic zone, this whole area. And of course, because of this, I mean, there are the tallest mountain we have, I mean, the highest mountain peak, which is Mount Everest. And also this whole region from Hindu Kush to this whole Himalayan range, which runs up to 2,400 kilometers. That's huge. I mean, imagine, but unfortunately, with all global warming and all, the glaciers are melting. And with talking about glaciers, I mean, this is amazing. I mean, this is an awe-striking moment that you have almost over 32,000 glaciers in that region. 32,000. That's huge, man. I mean, isn't it, Conan? So why don't you talk about the path of the river? Like, we would be talking about few river system here. So why don't you start that?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Arpita, for those lovely compliments too. I think you flatter. But yeah, like we're talking about human life, and it is natural to draw a lot of parallels with nature as we see around us. And so speaking of the course of the river, let's go back to the birthplace and how and where it all starts. Now, like you rightly said, it's one of the largest. Well, this region, along with the Tibetan Plateau and the mountains, is one of the largest resources of fresh water on the planet, and there is close to about 730 odd million tons, I think, of silt that comes down every year from the Himalayas. But most of these rivers, as we see, out of the 10 major river systems that originate here, we'll also look specifically at 3, but most of them start from very, very humble beginnings in glaciers or glacial lakes. Now, in a very, very pristine environment. And the reason why we are harping on glaciers now and again is, out of the immense amount of concentration of glaciers here, I think I was reading somewhere that covers roughly about 33,000 square kilometers. Just to highlight the importance why it is to understand these glaciers. They're far more removed from a lot of us, which unfortunately does not get the attention it needs, but how important this region is. So going back to where all these rivers start, a lot of them originate in glaciers as a mere trickle compared to what they manifest themselves as further downstream. And many of the systems start off with multiple glaciers and then form in confluences and join up and as they gather speed in the valleys below. But here's just an example of 2 rivers from the same region. That one originates directly from the glaciers you see on your right, and on the left is a glacial lake, which starts off as a small stream and then they join together and form a larger river. Now, let's just zoom in a little bit on the same graphic which we showed earlier. Yes, it's got some of the largest ice reserves on the planet anywhere. A lot of it is covered by permafrost. But looking at three major rivers that totally, account for close to 10,000 square kilometers, a long journey flowing through multiple countries, start from a region, and it's in the sort of the left portion of your map where you see the town of Dehradun, or rather where the text for Dehradun is. So there's this region which is Mount Kailash and two neighboring lakes, one of which is the Mansarovar, where three major rivers start from. So you got the Brahmaputra, which is also known as the Yalang Sangpo. You have the Ganges, and you have the Indus River. Now they all start from a region which is roughly about 300 square kilometers apart, and these three mighty rivers originate there and take these long journeys throughout the subcontinent. And this place is interesting because it is also considered a holy site for pilgrimage, and every year scores of pilgrims from 4 different religions actually consider this as a holy site. Many of them cross national boundaries and go on foot to reach Mount Kailash. Now, Mount Kailash, to give you a context in the for the subcontinent, is what Mount Olympus was to Greece. So it is that significant of a mountain. That's where it's the abode of the gods. It is sacred. Many consider, both Hindus and Buddhists and Jains consider it a sacred place. But in this beautiful, pristine, fairly untouched by human environment, not all is rosy, or not all is peaceful. Yes, as you mentioned earlier, glaciers are very, very prone to climate change. And it's not just the change of climate that happens locally, but it can be something as far removed as the Indian Ocean or in the plains of southern India. So any small change, any rising temperature due to development or to loss of tree cover can affect these glaciers far, far away from everything else. So while they might be out there situated in this really pristine environment, they are fragile as well in the same breath. Now, ongoing studies are going on, and it's actually shown that in the past 40 years, some of these glaciers have actually shrunk by almost 10% due to global warming. And this is not the case, and this is the case not just for the Himalayas, but the world over. Now, while we may not see any direct human or rather direct impacts immediately, but there are certain direct impacts can be felt on the local wildlife. So looking at some of the high altitude wildlife that inhabits these regions, so you got things like the blue sheep or the burrell and the snow leopard. Anecdotal information and now backed up by photographs have actually shown a lot of these animals are actually moving downward on the slopes. And these are animals that live up in high altitude regions above the tree line, right where in the permanent snows, in scree and moraine habitat, really desolate barren landscape. And some of them are actually moving down further to tree lines as well. And into forested areas. There's camera trap images of snow leopards down in forested areas of India and Bhutan. And we also look at the bar-headed geese, for instance. Now, this is one of the highest flying birds. They've known to fly. There's records of them flying over 8,000 meter peaks over Mount Everest and Makalu in Nepal. And these birds nest high up in high altitude lakes in the Himalayas. And with glacial melt and with the water levels increasing in some of these lakes, there's a chance of them losing out on their nesting site. So there are obviously direct impacts to this. And so what we're trying to say is that this region here, while it's far removed and birthplace for many of these rivers, there are some effects that can directly you can see happening in front of you. So again, to draw the human comparison of the birth and the course of the river. So from the birthplace, so from its sort of nascent stage to where it's growing up years, where it's unpredictable. It starts off small and then reaches big, and then there's huge glaciers, there's waterfalls, there's ice falls, and all of that. We see the same rivers, sort of change character as they sort of grow in size, and as they come down the valleys, sort of creating, become raging torrents, and sort of open up and become adults, so to speak. And Arpita, I see you smiling there. I know you want to talk about something specific here.
Yeah, you're right. I'm just smiling thinking of it. I mean, in the, in the school days, we used to, it's like a metaphor that we use, your life and the river. And now, standing at this age, I do realize completely that it's so true. Suppose when you were talking about the upper altitude, like the high altitude river and its system and how it like evades through the land, and then I would say that when the flow, I mean, when the river flow or enters into the channel bed, a helical sedimentary current setup, like when the stream is bending or it's going into its course, it does the deposition on both of its sides, especially on the inner side of the river. And slowly there the landmass and all this alluvial deposition, and of course there's all boulders, the weathering, everything happens on that course. So it's more like when you grow up, it's like, you have to do a lot of work. You have to do a lot of savings, a lot of earning money. You want to go reach your career. You keep on changing that, try to settle down that, yes, there you want to go. So in this time, the river goes through the same thing. And with that, it like bruises out a lot of things, starting from the human life to animal. I think all these sorts comes in between. They have sand beaches. It's not like the ocean or the sea, but they have beautiful river line where it's a beautiful place in Bhutan, and this is how it start transforming. And while doing that, imagine we meet so many people and so many circumstances, right? So if we think in the perspective of a river, then imagine how many types of habitat a river can form during this time, during this middle elevation area, which could be like different forests, like Himalayan oak habitat, which is like a backbone for a biome there. And we get to see this oak from 1500 to 3600 meter. That's quite high. And the villagers over there, they do it's the oak leaves and the twigs, whatever they can collect from the forest, they also do decomposition through it. And that's had been doing like ages. They have been like doing sort of works with that. And then comes to the your coniferous forest as well. Yes, and then we have the moist deciduous forest, which is more like a mixture of big trees as well as the grasses. And also along with that, we have the deciduous forest. Now, Conan, when we talk about the grass, of course, we have to mention the tallest grass in the world. Those are the bamboos. And in case of bamboo, we generally see the bamboo thicket into the tropical and subtropical area. Commonly, I would say found from African Asia and the Central and the South America as well. And imagine like 1200 species, actually more than that. Till date, we have this much of data. Probably we will have more. So even the bamboo habitat completely different. And with that, we have this broadleaf forest, which is the middle elevation of the eastern Himalayas, if I'm talking about this Himalayan region. So imagine that river is facing or creating so many forests and like habitats around them. So animals cannot skip that, right? It's so lucrative for the animals to get so different types of habitats, and yes, that's our home kind of a thing. And they get so many things from there. So for that, I would mention few of the animals, which is the black bear. And they are found in an altitude of 300 to 3700 meter, which is quite high. And that's why we get to see not all over through the country, but in very few pocket areas of India, Nepal, China, and Bhutan. Then comes to on the right hand side, it's one of my favorite. That's the yellow-throated martin. Don't go by the cute face. It's really, but it's a like face which is in disguise of a highly skilled predator, because the way it hunts, even for some small macaques or longos, big birds, they can go just like that. They are very furious when they go into their job. And next, I would definitely would love to talk about a very cute animal which is found in the temperate forest in the high mountain of southwest China, is the giant panda, or you just say the panda. See, today I'm wearing the white and black one, so yeah. And nothing less than that. I am more like a panda. I just love to be in a lazy life. Trust me. Just eat, store your energy, and whenever you need it, you just do it. A little bit of rolling and bumping to one another. That's pretty awesome. And then we have this another one which is very fragile. I mean, this is the lazy one, which is like me. And then the next counter picture is of a clouded leopard. We also called it the ghost of the jungle. It is mostly found in the lower elevation forest, or mostly the foothill broadleaf forest. And it's a beautiful cat. It also falls under the big five cat we have in this region. And the next one, I mean, when we talk about the cat, of course, we cannot escape the big cat we talk about is a tiger, this magnificent, majestic cat, and which has which is distributed, I mean, vastly distributed from the higher mountain region to the coastal region. And yes, so the animal keeps strolling in their habitat, and I wish they still do. But there are human also living in the same habitat. And Conan, have you ever tried terrace farming? What the mountain people do?
Yes, I have tried very unsuccessfully. But before I get into that, I just suddenly thought of a fact when you said tiger. Now, incidentally, the tiger is also named after a river, and we all know the river Tigris from Iraq. And I think, if I remember rightly, Tigris means something like an arrow, stealthy or swift as
Yes,
an arrow, or stealthy as an arrow.
yes,
So there's another
yes.
river fact for you folks if you've been writing things up. Yeah, but yeah, the wildlife, of course, is fantastic in this region, and we cannot talk about the region without mentioning it's the humans as well. Um, and yes, so it is these river valleys, of course, are lush and green. They're fertile, and therefore agriculture is the common occupation. Now, you mentioned terrace farming. Yeah, when I initially worked in the region in the western part of the Himalayas, we live very close to a village, and I tried my hand at it very unsuccessfully, I must say. We just couldn't get the wild boar to stay away from the crops, but anyway. But yeah, so uh, the main type of agriculture, of farming, is actually terrace farming, and due to the difficulty in the terrain, none of these farms are actually large parcels of land or large holdings. Many of them are parcel holdings, could belong to individual families which have hand cut these terraces generations ago and passed on over generation. Now, to give you an idea of what is cultivated through these river valleys, of course, you have a lot of fruit and vegetables being grown depending on the region, on the country. There's also various kinds of grain. Rice seems to be very popular, of course, and in the less rainy times, they will also grow things like wheat, and in the higher reaches, barley. Tea is an important cash crop that is grown from eastern India all the way to China. And we all know those giant tea terraces and farmings if you've seen pictures. The climatic conditions is very, excuse me, very salubrious. It gets a lot of rain, apart from the fertility of what the river brings in itself as well. And of course, this rather large part of the region is dependent on the monsoons. So there is a fixed, we are in the tropics here, even though we are at a much higher elevation than you would normally associate with tropical conditions, but it is no doubt in the tropics. Therefore, we receive a lot of rainfall in these big river valleys, and the lower elevations get a brunt of this rainfall because imagine the Himalayas, which act as this massive barrier across. You're talking about 8,000 plus meters of this huge wall, and then you've got these moisture-laden winds that come off from the west, from the east coast and of Africa, and then from the southern Indian Ocean, blowing up across India and Sri Lanka and southern bit of Pakistan, and then they hit the Himalayas and then empty its entire load in that region. So these river valleys are teeming and are fertile because of not just the silt that it brings down, but also the monsoons that happen. And then on the other side, on the rain shadow area, is because none of these clouds are able to get over the Himalayas. We have the Tibetan Plateau, which is a high altitude desert, because it receives very, very less than 50 centimeters of rainfall in the entire year. And this cycle continues. That evaporation causes warming. The warmth will attract clouds, and this cycle goes on. So a large part of Southeast Asia gets rains during the second half of the year, starting from May, in fact, May, June, all the way up to November, and it goes in phases across Southeast Asia. And a lot of it has to do with the influences with these mountain systems that these rivers flow through. Yes, Arpita.
Yeah, just while you were talking about the rainfall, I think I was just about to say that I mean, we are living in a region where one of the highest rainfall in the world happens. I mean, in the eastern side of Himalayas, we have a place called Mawsyngram, which gets almost 1,100 centimeter of rainfall per year. So that's huge, and this whole habitat gets so much of rainfall, and the rest of the habitat gets almost 70 to 200 centimeter of rainfall. That's amazing, I guess. It's a life.
Oh, that's crazy. Yeah, yeah, and that's on the border of India and Burma, isn't it? Myanmar. Yeah. So yeah, so like we've seen rainfall, obviously it influences agriculture, and humans have adapted their agriculture cycles to rain. But going back a few slides, what Arpita was talking about, the different forest types and these little valleys also have their own microclimates sometimes. And Mawsyngram and Cherrapunji and these kind of places get really high rainfall. Is just that structure of the valleys is something that attracts and sort of gets a brunt of the rain. And also from the same region, another kind of farming that's practiced is what's called June cultivation, or shifting agriculture. Now it's easy to move to follow the monsoons with your crops, right? And if you don't want to put that effort into building terraces and making the land arable, this is what is used. And so yeah, forests patches are slashed and burned, and then farming starts, and then the cycle repeats. So once you finish one cycle, you want to leave the land fallow to sort of regain its fertility, and then you move on to the next cycle. Now, this obviously is not a sustainable type of farming, and there has been concerted efforts into educating the local people into using better or more sustainable farming methods, because not only is it taking away the fertility of the land, but can also cause issues such as landslips and so on with the heavy rains when that happens. Yeah, but still on the note of people, yes, the people are as vibrant as the ecosystem in itself, and this is just a tiny little snapshot of the color and vibrancy you see in the region. Often each valley, in fact, sometimes has its own unique culture, unique food, and unique customs, and so on. We have major religions followed Hinduism in most part of the subcontinent, that is India and Nepal. You have Buddhism, which is in the higher reaches of the Himalayas, also into Tibet and Bhutan as well, and into Myanmar and the outlying regions of northeastern India. And then you also have a lot of animism still being followed or more or less amalgamated in some mainstream religions such as Christianity, even in some of these valleys, and some of them still follow ancestral worship and worship the nature and the soil and the elements around them, such as Bon and some tribal religions. Now, the land in general is respected. Yes, Arpita, you had something else.
Yes, because yeah, this is so much of colors when we talk about. Then, as you have mentioned about the food, and being a foodie, I cannot like skip this thing that this whole Nepal, India, Bhutan trip, which we do. I think it's the animal culture, and with that, we can actually do a webinar on our food safari we do. I mean, we have during this whole period of time. The different cuisine which are like placed in front of us, it's absolutely amazing. And you get the flavor of the culture through food. That's for sure.
I agree with you there. And if there's one dish that kind of unites all the river valleys, I think, across Asia, it's the dumpling.
Dumpling.
Think about that, folks. Yeah.
Yes.
So, well, basically, there is obviously a lot of respect for the land because you're living off it. And often that respect leads to worship. And rivers in general are considered holy by a lot of the local population living there. And confluences seem to be even more auspicious. And there's a lot of practice, especially in Hinduism and Buddhism. And often at a confluence, you will find a shrine or a larger temple that has been built there to signify the holiness of the place. And many people will take pilgrimages to these confluences. So here is just two contrasting confluences, one with contrasting rivers. You've got a spring-fed river and the glacial river meeting at a place called Devprayag, which is a very, very important Hindu site in India. And then you've got the mother river and the father river forming a confluence at this town of Punakha with this beautiful Buddhist monastery on the banks. And that's a picture from one of our trips into Bhutan. But again, in this landscape, there are also threats to these rivers. And in my opinion, I think one of the biggest threat is development and the institution of big hydroelectric projects. Now, hydroelectric is easy to think of it as something that it's good, clean energy. Yes, we're not burning fossil fuel. We're using a natural resource which is being replenished. So the impact may not be as severe. But then one begs to ask the question, you're looking at a highly seismic region and you've got rivers that often change course during its lifetime. And we've got these massive hydroelectric projects. Now, combine all of that with the influence of humans or with the diversity, or sorry, the density of humans that live in this landscape, one would ask the question: is it actually something that has or that has as less an impact as we think it does? Arpita, you want to weigh in here?
No, I was just thinking because, of course, this all hydropower and because, all this river system come up when we think about, then this whole system brings so much of irrigation power, drinking water and the fresh water, the whole habitat changes. But with that, when the human interference increases with the natural boundaries or with the thing, I think that becomes a disaster sometimes. And exactly what is happening nowadays, which is very frequently, I would say, I mean, in past so many years, what we are seeing right now has changed so much. It's really scary because human settlements are getting right on the bank of the river. No matter wherever they are getting space, they are building a little house, and of course to build that you need to do a little deforestation, so the land is grippy, like losing the grip and everything. And especially when the river gates are open or when the rivers are changing its course, it's huge floods are hitting those areas. And because the human population is also increasing. At the same time, I think that is another very concerned part we should work on, or just, I mean, what do you say, Conan?
Yeah, I think definitely it is, the human presence there certainly exacerbates the whole situation, and, just large scale unplanned development is what make these, whenever a disaster happens, what make the numbers really rise. I'm thinking back to the 2013 floods which we had in the northern part of India, which over 6,000 lives were lost due to a cloudburst, a seasonal cloudburst, and then one of the glacial lakes overflowed its banks. And then there's also the seasonal. Well, a lot of these rivers, and I'm sure you're going to you tell us about this later, Arpita. A lot of these rivers actually go through a natural process of flooding, and it's only because of the other alterations, or the artificial alterations to the landscape, is when the impacts are exacerbated. But it's not just with humans, but we also, again, I like to draw back to the impacts you feel directly on wildlife. Now, here are two birds. The white-bellied heron, probably less than even maybe a couple of hundred left in the wild. And then we have the ibisquill, whose numbers are not great either. And these are birds that need pristine rivers that are not dammed, that have these large shingle banks where they have specifically adapted for that habitat. And when you look at, either shingles being taken away from the banks due to quarrying, or water levels rising because of dams, and they lose their habitat, we're looking at the loss of two unique species as well. But, looking at the river, it's, sort of, and I'm getting philosophical here, it sort of seems to flow through in this never-ending journey of life. And with that, let's also just flow downstream a bit and see what it does as they meet the plains on either side of the Himalaya.
Yeah, Conan, you rightly say we are getting philosophical about it, but it comes along with the river course, right? So now we have reached in that part of the life where you have, know that what exactly you need to do. Like we know that we have, no matter what happens, we have to be in and around wildlife. We have to be in, need to do trips and go to the national parks to see the animals. Now we are settled that this is our career goal. But with that, when you know that your life is settled in the way that you are focused, that what you want to do, you are with lots of responsibilities along with you. Okay, all of experiment. Yes, please.
So are you saying that sort of the later part of midlife, or the early part of retirement, is when you are as peaceful as a large river valley?
Oh yes, absolutely. But with a lot of packages. But with a lot of packages. So yes, that is how it is. So I would bring here, which I spoke about before, is two of my very favorite, place, or the river system, is one in Nepal, which is runs through the Chitwan National Park, and I would say that the source of life is gives by the river Narayani, which is also a snow-fed river. And then we come to this Indian park, which is Kaziranga National Park, and also Brahmaputra is a huge, it's responsible for its source of life as well. So fortunately, these two habitats get a lot of similarities between them, because at this point, the rivers settle down a bit. Though they have the current, they do flood, and especially we all know about Brahmaputra flooding every year, forming the new life, because that, I think, that brings the new minerals or the fertility to the soil to grow more vegetation in and around that area. And this is called, we call this a Terai region, where we have the grassland, we have the broadleaf forest, riverine forest, mixed deciduous, and in some higher altitude areas, we have a little bit of coniferous forest as well. So again, from the middle elevation of the mountain range where the rivers is on its middle elevation, the habitat we see, the diversity of animals we see here, the same thing happens here again. This place invites a lot of animals and numerous number of birds with huge density in these areas. I mean, you can reach up to 800 species of bird in this kind of land, I mean areas, habitat. And with birds, we have huge mammals as well as the Asiatic elephant, one-horned rhino. Rather, India and Nepal has, I mean, together they have the only population of the greater one-horned rhino. In Kaziranga National Park, we have the highest population here. And here on the left hand side is the Asiatic water buffalo. Trust me, Conan, I have seen like huge buffaloes where the gap between the two horns could be sometime 4 to 6 feet. I mean, I would be dangling in between. I'm just 5 feet. So yeah, that's like a tandoori, you know, the roasted chicken, how you feel like it should be like that. They are huge, they are huge. And then comes to the huge, to the smaller ones is the freshwater turtles. Brahmaputra is a place where we find the highest density of species, I mean different species of turtles there in all over India. And where India almost shared 30% of the world population of freshwater turtles. Brahmaputra has the highest density of it. And with that, another reptile and the most unique species in the crocodile family, and also in the caiman and alligator family, is the longest snouted crocodile, which is we are known to gharial, which we get to see in Chitwan National Park. And also there is a population in India, which is in Chambal. But apart from these two areas, we don't see this species anywhere else. And this is also critically endangered, these gharials. Talking about the river and the system, of course, connected is the grassland, because grass are the first thing which grow on a plain to hold the whole, soil. So here is a bird called the Bengal Florican, and it is threatened because of the habitat loss. Too much of human encroachment to those areas. They are not a forest bird, so you would see them just on the grassland, on the agricultural land sometime after the harvestation is done. So we are losing these birds as well. But this is good that still till date we see them. Even for this one also, I think it's less than, I mean, all over this whole Asian country, there would be less than 500 maybe. I'm not sure about but it's not more than 1,000 for sure. They are decreasing, their number is decreasing, but the human population, we are keeping it like high. It's just raising. There is no squeeze in that. Yeah. So what about the population you are going to talk about, Conan?
Yeah, sure. It's well, not just for wildlife density, but human density as well, right? And this place is also one of the densest humanly populated place on the planet. And they come with fair diversity as well in terms of races and communities. And the river basins have always been, historically, you look at it, has always been centers of civilization and commerce and trade flourish thanks to the rivers. And here's a picture from one of the oldest cities, continuously inhabited cities in the world, the city of Varanasi, that's on the banks of the river Ganges. But through history, if you go back a few hundred years, we have I take you to the time of the Mahajana Padas. Doesn't roll off the tongue very easily, but was this amalgamation of city-states that all grew around major river systems, and it was not just Himalayan rivers. Some of them even flowed to the major rivers in the south of the peninsula. But look at that concentration of these little kingdoms around the Gangetic Basin. So, and there's a reason why all this humanity is there. And yes, the wildlife loves it because of the habitat, and it's also prime habitat for a pastoral life. So this is the time where we looked at in the human history of the subcontinent, where nomads came through and they sort of settled down on seeing this really rich and fertile land, started settling down around these river basins. And again, of note, in this region is another city of Patliputra, now called Patna, which is a capital city, again, a continuously inhabited city for thousands of years. And also, this region had one of the oldest universities recorded in the world. And that's a picture from there in the insert. And that's the Nalanda University. It was a Buddhist university where we had travelers coming all the way from China and the Far East to study Buddhism here, which originated also in this river valleys. As we speak about this, it struck me not very far from, from the Indo-Nepal border. That's where Buddhism, Lord Buddha was born. And even if you go back, trace back a few thousand years more, and if we move west towards the Indus Valley, was also a very, very thriving, organized society of people that lived there. Now, earlier it was thought that they all belonged to one civilization, and in textbooks it's still counted as one civilization. But studies have shown, and they're still being unearthed as we speak today, studies have shown that they could have also existed separately, and each of these townships sort of had its rise and decline over different periods of time. So which is why it's very, very hard to pinpoint when the civilization started. But the biggest rise, or the maturity of this civilization lasted between 2600 to 2300 BC, and as ruins are being unearthed, more and more information is being found out. And so again, we're looking at a pastoral community. Fishing is a common livelihood, especially along the larger channels of the river. And honestly speaking, Arpita, if you look at these pictures, I think apart from the nylon net, I don't think much has changed in the past 1,000 years. They still use dugout boats. Some places they use animal hide as well as canoes. And like I said, apart from the introduction of nylon and plastic, I don't think anything else has changed, especially in fishing. So communities still live. A lot of communities are structured around the livelihoods that they lead there. So there's fishing communities, there's farming communities, and there is trade, and even in some cases still partnering that exists between these communities in these great river plains of Asia. And as we reach sort of the end of the hour and the end of our presentation, we also sort of get to the end point of our river, the terminal of our river course, that we've had this journey, and we're actually moving into Arpita's backyard here from her hometown where she lives, very close. And let's talk about, for me, probably, yes, I know the Amazon Delta is massive, but this for me is the most interesting delta I've actually had the privilege to visit as well. Why don't you tell us a little bit more about the Sundarbans and where all of these great rivers finally sort of empty out?
Yes. So this is of course, Sundarbans is one of the largest delta in the world, and also a habitat for a lot of inhabitants in case of animal and the human as well. So I would talk about the mangrove forest, because it is very distinct forest patch than what we have spoken about for so long. So we have like near about 120 species of mangrove plants which grow here, and with this estuary or the backwater, there are like inhabitants like tiger, Bengal tiger, saltwater crocodile, you'll have king cobra, deer, wild boar, there are even wolves which have been thriving in this water, in the saline water, I would say. And due to the increase in salinity, of course, a lot of things are changing slowly, but the people of the thing is, where the rivers is emitting the sea, which is the Bay of Bengal, and from there we can say that people over there also depends on fishing, because it's directly connected to the sea, and there they go out with boats, and of course in small boats as well, to small tunnels and creeks, and sometimes they get caught by the tiger, and they taken away, I mean the tiger, they have been taken away by the tigers over there. But of course Sundarban tigers are not monitor. It's like a free home delivery for the tiger, that you go to their place and you are done. So they are very ferocious, and with the same thing, like they also have like honey collection. Well, you would like to talk about it because it's interesting,
Yeah,
and you have
yeah,
been
sure.
to.
I
Yeah.
certainly, I, I had the privilege of looking at these guys go out gathering honey. And, okay, first thing I think that probably our viewers would look at is that the mask on the back of the head. But we get to that in a sec. But these honey collectors, and so it's a very, very narrow season which they have, and they go out into the forest to collect this forest honey into the mangrove. So a lot of them come, and this happens both in India and in Bangladesh. And many of them go out in these slightly bigger than dugout canoes, really, often 5 or 6 members. One of them always stays on the boat, while some of them will go out into the forest to collect honey. And they use old methods of smoking leaves next to the honeycomb to drive away the bees. Then they collect, and they stay on the boat for days on end till the season's over, and then come back to their village. Now, what's with the mask, you might ask? Yes, a lot of it has been said about the Sundarban tigers. They do have a bad rap of being man-eaters, and it's also one of the places where there is a high man-animal conflict. But like you said earlier, it's almost like a free home delivery of being delivered to their doorstep. Now, it is a harsh landscape, and I'd like to remind our viewers here, and it is hard. It's a hard life making out an existence in this highly saline, highly humid, ever shifting, because of the tides and and the mud flats, as we see here. In fact, I just digress a little bit here to the problem which Bangladesh faces. Now, while this is superbly fertile land, it's not stable land in a lot of places, and especially as you get close to the estuaries and the coast, a lot of this land actually shifts, which you can see in the image right at the bottom on the right. So you have these huge mud flats which keep shifting, and therefore construction is not stable. There are entire villages which have to move every few years because they lived on really literally the ground that shifts beneath them. So it is a harsh landscape, and so it's a struggle to make out an existence. And one of the methods that has helped with reducing man-animal conflict is these masks. Yes, they look extremely funny, but the theory is, or rather the hypothesis is, that a tiger will never attack. Tigers always attack from behind when you're not looking. And so when you wear a mask behind, that means the tiger always sees a face that's looking at him and would presumably not launch an attack that fast. And it certainly has helped with numbers, and it's also certainly helped with people's confidence in going out. I've spoken to people who have, swear by using these masks and will never go out without these masks. But yes, it is a hard existence. Forest honey is extremely valuable, isn't it, Arpita?
Yeah, those are delicious. I get the privilege that every year or maybe couple of year I get few kilos of honey at my home. So I never used to buy buy from the shop. But let me tell you one interesting thing. In the first few days of April, there is in the whole mangrove forest only one species of flower blooms, and the honey they collect during that time. It's like a single malt. So the color is more whitish or little pinkish. It's not the amber color what you see in honey, and that is the finest honey you can ever like taste. So yeah, and hardly you get it also, but it's the best
Wow.
one.
Yeah. Fantastic. So on that sweet note, actually, we'll reach the conclusion of our section with you folks. And I just want to throw up this picture there for you. It's the highly endangered, or rather the critically endangered Gangetic river dolphin, one of the two species of river dolphin which we have in the subcontinent. And the reason why this picture is, just to show you that, rivers, of course, we've seen have had a mighty influence on everything they touch, but they're also fragile and need our care. And we've seen humanity and wildlife have existed here for millennia, and in this constant sort of yin and yang of positive and negative forces, or two opposing forces living together. And there is, and we'd like to leave you with that image, sort of the end, hoping that this presentation has actually brought some awareness to you about this region, and we hope that this awareness is important and it's key into affirmative action, and action will lead to conservation. So thank you all once again for joining us and listening to us, and getting to know and showing your desire to know about this region. And we would actually like to stop talking here at this point and hear from you if you have any questions or comments. So back to you, Rob.
Thank you, Conan. Now, before we start the question and answer session, I'd like to remind everyone that you can submit your questions via the question field in your control panel. All right, let's get to some questions. Tell me, is pollution in the Brahmaputra River Valley decreasing?
Sorry, Rob, can you repeat the question?
Absolutely. I was wondering if the pollution in the Brahmaputra River was decreasing.
You want to, Conan?
But no, talking about pollution decreasing, I just left it to you, Arpita. Brahmaputra is your.
Okay, no, that is fine. I mean, you just did this, so I thought that no, it's not because of the pollution. It's not Brahmaputra decreasing, but it's happening because of the human, too much space of Brahmaputra has been taken for agriculture or for the human, the inhabitants of their place. So that is that is doing the main that is the main cause for which Brahmaputra is facing a lot of problem. But for pollution, I would say it's mainly the deforestation, because Brahmaputra area land is so much of forest is still surviving there that still they can minimize the carbon footprint over there. But the deforestation, it's taking over. I think that is the main reason for which Brahmaputra is getting affected.
Great, thank you for
If I
clarifying.
can just, oh, sorry, I had 2 bits to add to that, if I may.
Please.
Yes,
well, a couple of other threats to the Brahmaputra are also large hydel projects. There is actually a bone of contention right now. Higher up in the foothills, actually, just where it enters India, where the terrain is a little bit more mountainous, is also more conducive to have dams. Down in the valleys, where sometimes the river can get to about 30 kilometers wide, you can't. But in the mountains, you can, and there are a few dams there. But there's also a proposal to make another massive hydel project on the Yalang Sangpo. So that's a part of the Brahmaputra that flows through the Tibetan region. And I mean, it's a Chinese proposal, and that's right now a bone of contention between both India and China, because they feel that it will affect life immensely downstream, and that's being sorted out on the governmental level right now, or rather being discussed.
Great, thank you for your answer. Now, because there is some higher temperatures in the Himalayan peaks, and there are sheep that are climbing down the mountains, are hikers experiencing these higher temperatures? And do you know how much the temperatures have risen there in the Himalayas?
Well, I can say for sure is that going now compared to when I started probably 20 years ago going to the region, it certainly feels a little warmer than usual. But then it's not always that clear. What we're also seeing in terms of climate change is we're seeing a lot of change in rainfall patterns. For instance, a couple of weeks ago, some of my friends who actually live up in the Himalayan foothills were completely marooned because the heavy rains brought in floods in some of the big rivers there, the Ramdan and the Kosi, and which overflowed. And it's very unusual for this time of the year. So it does not happen usually at this time of the year. So that's a new change we are seeing. The tree line in some places, I can say for sure, has seemed to have visually at least gone upwards. You can see areas which used to be snow line, they are now tree line, which means the snow line has receded. So we're seeing small changes, and again, what affects one valley one way may not affect another valley the same way. So it really depends, but there is change for sure. There is sometimes visual, rather tangible temperature difference, and sometimes you see things like unseasonal rainfall. So there is changes happening, and it manifests itself differently. I hope that's an adequate answer to that question.
Absolutely. And to follow up, are there any strategies that are emerging to deal with the disappearing glaciers up in the Himalayas?
Well, I think the good step forward is the fact that there is studies happening. That's, I think, the first step is getting to know exactly, or educating yourself first what happens. But I think the biggest problem with the glaciers is that the fact that it's so far removed from the general population or the general narrative of conservation, which which is present, that they sort of get the proverbial end of the stick, and you don't relate to it, which is why I think the first step is always educating, and then you start caring about it, and then that's when it works into action and then strategies. So to answer your question, yes, there are studies going on sort of a multinational level, and from the non-governmental agencies as well. I know WWF for sure is doing a lot of work on glaciers as well. There is organizations such as the Third Pole who we used a lot of data from their studies for this presentation as well. So there is studies going on. Arpita, you want to say something?
No, I was just about to say that the whatever study or the work is going on, it's more than the local people awareness. It's like what it's happening is globally, because the third pole is getting affected with the global footprints what we are leaving behind. So I think it's a huge range of awareness which is happening, not only in these areas, because it's not getting affected by the locals, because still they are continuing the life they used to do with the ancestors, with little bit of changes and practicality they have brought into their life. But it's the global thing, like mostly the like subtropical industrialist thing built is actually for which the reason things are mostly getting affected. I mean, this is my, yeah.
Great. Thank you very much for that answer. And unfortunately, that's the last question that we have time for today. So I'd like to hand it back to you two for any closing comments you might have.
Sure.
Okay.
Well, all I would like to say at this point is, again, thank you for joining us. And I say this because, as we've been talking about this, it's that the more people know about a given a cause, the more you get connected to it, the more you empathize with it and actually start caring about it. And that only augurs well for any conservation strategy or method we have. So if you want to do something about it, the first step is knowing, and then that will move you to action. So thank you for joining us that way and getting to know about this place.
Yeah.
Arpita, you want to?
Yes, and thank you so much. And with Conan, the word you said, I would just say a little thing that how the conservation tourism has taken a big initiative of saving this animal and landforms. I think thanks to all the guests who have been traveling with us and helping us to stick to our goal and our focus, that what we continuously doing, that whenever we do trips and to like getting into new places, we influence the people around there to save the land and to save the wildlife. So thank you so much for being there with us, and thank you again, Rob and Conan. Thank you for bringing me in. Thank you, everyone.
Well,
I think
it was a pleasure, everybody, and have a good rest of the day.
Arpita, Conan, thank you so much for taking the time to present for us today. And I'd also like to thank everyone who tuned in. Join us tomorrow for our next Daily Dose of Nature. You can check out this week's lineups, including registration links, on our website at nathab.com/webinars. We did record today's presentation, and we will have the replay link available on our website soon. With that, I will conclude the webinar for today. Goodbye, everybody. We'll see you next time.